Matthias Chika, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being with us as this election, historic time of the year, as the chairman for United Capital and also an economic and political analyst. We thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Maria.
We know the general election is here for the U.S. It's historic and at best. And we know that the Nigerian community is very much a part of this election. Tell us how this election is affecting the U.S., but also specifically the Nigerian community.
It's been very unusual in many ways. It's been very polarizing. You've seen the country divided across lines that are somewhat atypical. It's been one that has come after a period of economic turmoil and one in which there's still a lot of economic uncertainty because indeed the economy has recovered. If you look at the top numbers, GDP is growing again, albeit 10 or so growth. The financial markets have recovered, but it's not been quite inclusive. Wages have stagnated and unemployment still remains somewhat problematic. And so this economic insecurity has played out in many ways, not just in the US, it's sort of a global phenomenon in the Western economies. So in that sense, there's a lot of anger out there, and you're seeing that translate into the politics. For Nigerians, it has a lot of ramifications. I think Nigerian Americans are quite a different community from Nigerians who live in Nigeria for the obvious reason that the impact of each election is different to them. And Nigerians tend to, this is surprising, they tend to fall across both parties depending on where they are and depending on their level of education. It's not automatic that they're all Democrats, as most people intuitively think.
Matthias, how different is this from the previous elections? We know that the U.S. Has been in this for a very long time with democracy, but we know this is a very different election than previous before.
I think some of it is income. Quite frankly, people tend to believe Democrats increase taxes and therefore your income, your disposable income reduces. Some of it is social issues. So Nigerians are not very strong on LGBT rights, as you can imagine, and some of the more conservative issues on religion and the rest of it, they fall on the conservative side of the spectrum. However, because increasingly the Republican Party has tended not to identify with minority interests, some will go as far as accusing them of bigotry and racism, especially the front runner. That has pushed a lot of Nigerians firmly into the Democratic camp.
We know there's probably many Watch Night events going on here in the U.S. with the Nigerian community. Where might the Nigerians be this evening watching this election?
I'm not completely plugged into all the communities, but, you know, there are substantial Nigerian population-wise. There's numeric strength for communities in the Texas, Dallas, Houston area, right here in Maryland, and obviously in some parts of both coasts as well. They are not necessarily as closely knit as some of the other communities. So beyond the formal events of the embassies and the rest of it, we're not going to see, I think individually they'll partake as part of other groups than within the community itself.
The economy is one of those key questions that we have not yet spent a lot of time talking about here in the U.S. with this election. Tell us how the global economy will be affected by whether it's Donald Trump or Secretary Clinton.
It's a good question. And it's a tragedy that this election has been devoid of proper policy discussions. So there's been a lot of, I think because of the high negatives of both candidates, there's been a focus more on the individuals who are running, and each person is trying to make a case on why this is the worst candidate. But there's not been the real positive debate. And what that has left is it's not been granular. There's no real detail as to each person's policy. If you visit the websites of both candidates, you're going to see roughly a page of declaratory policies without deep substance. But if we pick that anecdotal evidence, what we would see is that Trump has what it looks more in some ways like a Republican agenda where he wants to cut taxes. The instance of those taxes are probably going to benefit the wealthy more than the not so wealthy. He's talked about, and this is unusual for a Republican, growing infrastructure. He's also talked about trade deals and renegotiating or scrapping trade deals, which is somewhat unusual for Republicans. Republicans are for free trade, free global trade, because it's for a simple fact that it's beneficial. Now, all of this will come at a significant cost because you cut taxes. How do you make up for the revenue that is lost? And there are debates about the growth projections. What we know for a fact is that currently growth has been pretty tepid, but it's going up. And for the first time, wages are beginning to rise since the recession. Hillary's plan on the other hand, looks to increase taxes for the wealthy. She has an outline 4% charge that's going to go to the top line. And she looks also to cut taxes for the not so wealthy. She's spoken aggressively about increasing the minimum wage. All of those things and spending on infrastructure and giving free tuition in college is a huge programs that will cost a lot of money. How would this be funded as well without growing the debt? So both candidates, both their plans are going to increase the debt. They don't look to cut the deficit. I think that is injurious to the U.S. economy. And I think the valence of each of these plans will depend on who controls Congress and the Senate. It's looking increasingly like the Republicans will maintain Congress and they might win the Senate. Whatever the case is, if they win Congress, as they're almost starting to do, Hillary's plans will be difficult for her to push through these plans. It will be easier for Trump to push through if they do retain the Congress. What does this mean for the guy on the street and for Nigerian? If your taxes come down, it affects you real time. If growth is going to grow, it does affect you. But I think the minimum wage will be a growth dampener if they can somehow effect that. I think also that growing taxes at a time like this will be a growth dampener. However, investing in infrastructure would improve productivity in the economy. And I think this is something that is needed not just in the US, but a lot of countries in the globe are grappling with this, what they call secular stagnation now, where there's no real growth going on. And they've all been cutting rates to the extent that it's negative in Japan and negative for the ECB for some tenors. And it's not translated to growth. Right, so it's the productivity growth that I think is more important. And if she's going to invest in infrastructure, that's a good idea. Trump says he will too.
We know there's various data points that we should be focusing on this evening. What should the Nigerian community be looking at with those data points as this election rolls out?
This is going to be a very interesting election to watch. There is significant evidence of split tickets where people vote for one candidate for president and vote for a different party for the Senate or the congressional race. And so people are going to be watching to what extent this happens during this. The other thing you're seeing this year that's unusual is that there's been a pickup, an uptick in the Latino vote. There's been greater turnout for Latino voters. The African-American vote is not quite grown as much initially at least, but we would know today if they made up for the ground they lost in early voting. This is very significant in this election because the Trump campaign has basically, the strategy has been one that has sort of excluded the minority voters, the African-American Latino voters, and hoping that within the Caucasian voters, they could somehow get victory. There's some sense to that, in the sense that 72% of the voters in the last election were Caucasians. I suspect the figure will not be this high this time. And the margin of his victory among this demographic group or his loss among the other two demographic groups will determine if he makes it or not. Now, in terms of the swing states, there's some states that in the past elections were basically seen as either solid red or blue states that this cycle are in play. And so there's some sort of realignment. We would know at the end of today again if this realignment is real. But suddenly states like Arizona, which was reliably red, is seen as a swing state. I don't think that's going to happen, but this is the view. Georgia as well is seen as a swing state. These definitions are because the gap is less than 5% between both candidates. Again, difficult to do. And then you have the unique case of Utah, where a third-party Mormon candidate is actually very competitive. And it could be the first time since, I don't know, since Peru, where we would see, not even here, I think you have to go back beyond that, where you see a state not go to one of the two major parties. But tonight we should be, where the first results are going to come out from the East Coast. So we should pay very close attention to what happens in New Hampshire, what happens in Florida. And when those things begin to trickle in, we would have a good idea, of course, the Midwest. We'll have a good idea who's going to win or who's going to lose and what the future of the politics will look like.
Matthias Chika, thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to this election evening and what will be for this historic election.
Thank you.